Faith integration, but a couple things first. Maybe a little faith integration on the CIQ, Stephanie. So the CIQ reminded me of something, and I've done the CIQ, and I value from it, and I feel the tension that Scott describes, but it is a very helpful thing, and it does require some humility, as Gary mentioned. But
you can't unpack it at night if you're feeling tired.
Right. Well, and it's nice in a graduate class that I have a week to process it and not a day to create a new schedule. But I realized it's actually a familiar practice from Christian tradition. Does anybody remember or does it come to mind what the CIQ is doing similar to something? The prayer of examen. The Ignatian prayer of examen, where at the end of every day, the Ignatian missionaries, monks, gather together, light a candle, and they ask each other two questions. They say, today, when were you closest to God? And today, when were you most distant from God? And so that can be adapted into all kinds of things, and we've adapted it to the learning thing. But we might also think about, at the end of a week, asking the students, this week, how did the content of this class draw you closer to God? This week, how did the content of this class challenge your relationship with God? That might be a spiritual formation kind of activity that ties the pedagogy of what CIQ is asking us to do with the spirituality that the Ignatian examen is asking us to do. And that might be a worthy weekly reflection for students to do, to make connections to their spiritual development with the content that you're there to teach them. So I think we need to remember, I'm not to faith integration yet, two things. This is complicated. And you are getting the fire hose of complication these couple of days. And so those who've been working on this for some months have been, the mind-twisting kinds of things. But in the midst of the complication, let's not give up the value of the complexity, right? The complexity of this is beautiful. And to see it come together as it could in the unique ways in the garden of each of your classrooms really, really, really excites me. And so we're trying to alleviate as much complication as we can and trying to answer and be clear about these things. And in the next few weeks and months, Katie and others around her are going to be trying to make clear what is complicated. But there's some beautiful things coming together here in the complexity of this that's very exciting. And I want to say that the most important thing here is not you or your content, it's the learner. But what the learner needs is these two big stories that we're working around, the two big stories of their success at APU over the next 4 years. And that, by the way, will be success for all of us because they're going to end up, many of them, choosing your program as their major because they encountered you in a very positive and powerful way. So this is an opportunity for that kind of promotional thing, but also an opportunity to say, I got to be a person at the start who helped make connections that made this person more successful than they would have been had they found these things when they were juniors and seniors. I hear people in senior seminars say things like, I wish I had known that back then. And some of it is about the help that's available. And so we're making that available to them now. But they also need the big story of your content. And I think that your content, so I'm trying to find an analogy for this, and so I thought of you, Louise. I thought of, it's H2O. The content that you bring, that's as much as I got, by the way, in terms of chemistry. Okay, but see, that's the thing, right? We're going to all put in, we're also, am I allowed to say this? So at Red Robin, they have what do they call them? Mixologists. So is that alcoholic or is that? Okay, right, so mixologist. So you're all sort of, shoot, can I?
On all the time.
Yeah. We just read it on So a whole world for you to integrate into your life.
It can always be edited out.
The content is your content is the water, is the H2O, and then these things you need to decide how much of this and how much of that, and when does it get offered, and how do I shake it up in a way that's particular to the needs of this group of people. And so whether it's faith integration or thriving principles or spirituality, all of it, the question, I think the complexity question is how does it meaningfully make connections to what I'm passionate about teaching? So Katie, part of what I'm thinking about as I walk up here is, have you told them about our sons?
No.
So our sons are friends. They're both named Elijah. Katie's son and Mars.
For a very long time, yes.
And so these are two great boys, and we love each other's boys, right? Like I think her son is amazing, and she kind of likes my son. We have a neat connection, right? It's a neat thing. So they're juniors they're going to be seniors in a few weeks, right? Basically seniors. And there's a possibility they're going to pick APU. We're still wondering. Hope so, sort of. And there's a possibility they're going to be in your class next year, the year from now. And when I think about what momentum offers and what the thriving ideals challenge us with and the content that you're passionate about, I hope they get you. You know? Because that's going to make, so okay. My son Elijah, he's a smart guy, but he gets easily distracted. And he's got lots of, temptations that all kids in his generation have. And he wants to watch movies and shows and Instagram and Katie supports his Instagram habit. Yeah. So. And all of these things, I think, have potential for being good in his life, but also for taking him down. Right? I'm a dad. I'm watching him. Right? I don't like his all-nighters, and so when I see that there's a section in the book on sleep, I want him to read it now, but I'm trying to decide, right? Because I think it would be so good if he got to experience it with you, and you got to challenge him, and his time at APU was meaningful because he learned with his cohort the common text of momentum being a part of what they talk about. Did you see that chapter on sleep? Roommate, you go to get some sleep, man. Don't you know it's going to affect the rest of your life at APU? So I'm a believer in the complexity of what this can give, recognizing that what you bring and what you're passionate about in terms of your content needs to be the thing that keeps it moving. And then the rest, how does it integrate in ways that make it meaningful? So that's my introductory thoughts.
And I'm just going to say one of the best days of my son's life was when Dr. Kaak
Are you going to tell? Are you going to?
Federalist papers.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were going to tell him about the other night. So.
Oh no, the other night.
The other night was a whole other story. Okay. So you know that faith integration at APU, we're shifting now. A little bit, still integration. And by the way, this is not in the iPad yet, because I did some shifting after reading CIQ, and so we'll put it in the iPad after this, okay? And I'm a little nervous how this is going to go because we have a lot of people who know a lot of things and been doing faith integration for a long time, okay? And I want to try to offer you some connections to consider for FYS, and then you make it work. You adapt it, right? Nobody's telling you have to do it this way or include it in these ways. Okay, so you got to make it work. Faith integration is informed reflection, and we want it to be informed reflection on and discovery of the relationship between Christian faith and whatever it is that you're teaching, so that these students can articulate more clearly Christian perspectives on truth and life as they go forward with us to advance the work of God in the world. You saw this in the PowerPoint that I asked you to look at, that faith integration works in two different directions. Christian faith informs our discipline, and our discipline can inform Christian faith, and that kind of makes it exciting. Now, don't read this. I just want you to use this as a visual for your thinking. And this is, as you can see, I'm just making this up. We're teaching freshmen. How does that work with faith integration? When freshmen, I'll just use these first two columns as examples. When freshmen comes in terms of the way they think, they tend to still be more compartmental, right? Their thinking is inherited from the authorities in their life. Maybe they're less open because they kind of know how things should be because they've been told. In terms of the Bible has been their parents' authority or their youth pastor's authority. They're taking it fully literally. In other words, they have a hard time recognizing that genre means paying attention to the Bible in different ways. And they tend to be, our Bible professors will tell us, biblically illiterate. So even though they've been hearing sermons and getting talks from youth groups and maybe having a devotional, they don't have a Bible literacy. But that changes over time, right? They become more aware and open to new ideas as sophomores. They begin to take ownership of their thinking as juniors. They realize that what they think needs to be their thinking as seniors. In terms of the Bible, they begin to become aware of the complexities and begin to see possible connections. Maybe they see connections on their own in terms of the discipline and faith. Then there's an increasing confidence in the Bible, and they're able to see discipline-related connections, and soon they have a growing comfort with the ambiguities that exist in the Christian scriptures, but they also recognize it as a source of authority. So let's be careful, especially those of us who teach graduate students a lot, and we got some of us in the room, to not teach our freshmen as if, right? Let's understand that they come in, and that's going to have implications for what we do when we teach them. Different. If you have a senior seminar and you do a lot of the senior seminars in your program, you got to do it differently than you do the senior seminar. Right? You're going to have to recognize that. All right, I'd like them just to understand what academic faith integration is as they go forward and have other opportunities to do that here. It's going to be modeled in the context of the course. I'm not going to make it a big, overwhelming kind of thing. I'm going to weave it in creative, interesting, engaging ways, and I'm going to maybe point to it and say, this is kind of what we're doing in this, rather than have high expectations of them. So this is just for you to be thinking about in terms of the audience that we have. Okay, let me show you 3 slides and then ask you to talk to each other and then talk back to me. Okay, I gave you a PowerPoint in the iPad that I asked you to look at. It's meant to be something that you could use, adapt, share with your class. Okay, so I'd like you to consider that. I encourage you to watch a little YouTube. And 38 minutes isn't long, but it's long when you've had long days. And so I understand you may not have gotten to that. But somebody at your table may have. So I'd like you to take those 2 things, assuming at your table that some have been exposed to one or the other or both of those, and to talk about it. What did you like? What did you find helpful? What might you challenge or change? What do you need clarification on? And then what questions or feedback do you have for me on that related to these resources? Okay? Their use for you, their help in you understanding what you might do. Talk to each other about that, and then let's talk together in about 10 minutes, okay? This is a slogan at APU, our slogan, our motto, but when it comes to faith integration, it's really God second. Don't tell the trustees or the president or anybody that said that. But the point of this is, it starts with your H2O. You don't start with Christian faith because there's too much and you can't do it all. They're going to get to experience a lot of stuff from Christian faith in chapel and their Bible professors and the other professors sitting around this room. What do you have in the content of your course as a place to start? And out of that becomes your opportunity to think about faith integration. If you start with all the things you're passionate about related to Christian life and Jesus and Christian theology, well, that's not your job. Your job is to teach your class, right? So you start with those things. Is there in your course that could be related? Can you evaluate? If there's evaluate a course-related idea from a perspective within the Christian faith. So is there a key theme in week 3 or 6 or 9 that you say, wow, this just begs to be looked at in light of Christian thought? Christians have thought about this. The Bible has something to say about this. Theology is relevant to this issue. Or how about the reverse? Can you evaluate a faith idea from a perspective within the course? So is there something that you think the course speaks to related to faith? Can you deepen a course-related idea from faith-based perspectives? Can you deepen a faith-based idea or practice from a perspective within the course? So I'm getting you to sort of think this way about these 2 passions you have, the passion for your ideas, your concept, your themes in your class, and your passion for God and for Christian life. Or can you start linking these 2 ideas together in a way that they impact each other in a meaningful way? Is there something you can name in something in the disciplinary conversation that you can name using faith language? So Marjorie used the word developmental, right? From the field of psychology. Christians talk about sanctification as a way to illustrate how people grow and develop in Christ. There's two different things that we can say, maybe that they can come into relationship with each other in terms of naming how they impact. Can you nuance an ethical practice or professional skill within the content of your course in light of its history within the Christian faith? So I was talking to friends in social work, and we were talking about the Christian practice of hospitality, and social workers want to be those kinds of people who create a safe place where people can become what they need to be, right? And have the resources put on the table to help them to go forward and find success and nourishment in their life. Maybe hospitality is a Christian practice that could inform the work done by a social worker. You probably have those kinds of things as well. Can you analyze and respond to a discipline-related case study from a faith perspective? So I assign Leadership, Theory, and Practice by Peter Northouse. At the end of every chapter are a number of case studies based on these different leadership theories. So when I look at those theories, I say to the students, can we look at this from a faith perspective? What is your faith perspective, or different faith traditions and the particular lens that they have on it, and how might this help us to understand it better? Do you need to be introducing a key thinker or practitioner for whom faith has had a relevant impact? So in your different fields, there's possibly someone, a thoughtful Christian person, who's been interested in your area. And your students shouldn't get out of a class like yours, or a program like yours, or a school like this without knowing about those people and being exposed to them. That can be part of what you do. So I put this up here because this is another possible place for faith integration. We were introduced to a number of themes, and one or more of these may be opportunities that you could work with. And I'm going to give you an example here in a minute related to sort of goal setting, but it's more, effort is the connection that I'm going to make. Okay? Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to do this in 3 minutes, Stephanie, and then we need our break, and then I might sneak in a little bit more of this into the critical thinking session.
That's like 2 minute and 39-second mark. I'll be standing up.
Yes, do that. That's why we appreciate each other's contribution in our lives. Okay, so can faith integration find a meaningful place in different assignments? Okay, the signature assignments that we're working with. So there's the list of them. In the research paper, have you all seen the rubric for the research paper? So you have that front and back with the different elements. Okay, so in that rubric, there are a section about inquiry, and there's a section about information literacy. These are places where you could involve faith integration and ask for it if you decide to. Now remember, this is a decision you might make. It's not one of the evaluative elements of the rubric. But you might want to say, here's something else I'd like you to do in designing this paper. And you have a choice. You could say, I want faith-related themes to be the focus of this research paper. You have the right to say that if you think that makes sense as they go forward to discover their topic. Or you might say, I want it to be an element of your paper. Not the whole thing, but I want you to include it as an element. Or again, you might decide not to include it at all. So you could say, okay, I'm going to, in the inquiry part of my evaluation of the research paper, I'm going to ask them to find course-relevant, a faith-related topic, and I'm going to suggest or require that they do this. Again, you could choose them. As an element, you can say, I want you to include in your research paper faith-related sub-themes or as a part of what you do in this research paper. Okay? So you could say that, or you could decide that that's too complicated and too much and choose not to. This is just a way in the research paper. Also in the information literacy part of the rubric, you could say, I would like most of your sources to be faith-informed in some way. Maybe what you're doing in the class and the outcomes you have and the topic lends to just that. If you're doing theology of art and it's all about theology of art, then it might be a focus of the paper and this might be the way to go. If it's something that has an element of faith in it, then you might say, I'd like you to have at least one source that's faith-informed. So in the research paper, this is one way to do it. For the oral presentations, and I'll say this and then I'll be done and I'll come back. I don't know. Okay, so different ways to do oral presentations, but I think, again, like a research paper, you could ask them to focus on a faith-related theme. Again, your topic being front and center. Or you could say, make faith an element of what you're doing in your oral presentation. So I'll stop there, and I'll come back, sneak in a little of my critical thinking time with some ideas for the final paper, the momentum paper, as ways to make some faith connections.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so I want to talk about faith integration related to the momentum paper assignment. And we're going to do that complicated, complex thing a little bit here and give you some options on how you might think about this, okay? So the aim of what I'm sharing with you is to prepare them in meaningful ways to write a thoughtful final paper, the momentum paper, which is the formation paper. It describes their plan and their goal going forward, okay? So I'm going to illustrate this in different ways. I have in my slides sort of script for the things I'm going to verbally describe for you. So I'll leave that script there. If it doesn't make sense when you look at it later and you think there's something that you want to clarify and I can be helpful with, then let me know. You have plenty of script in you, but that's the disclaimer going forward. So let's say that one of the things I want to equip them with to write a good momentum paper is this idea of being successful. And that word is used in the description somewhere. I saw it in here. Context for generating focused content for this paper. How will you know you've been successful when your day to graduate comes? Okay? So I'm going to say to the students, I want to talk to you about success today and what it takes to be a successful person. I've set up that idea. And this, I hope, I say to them, will prepare you for that final paper you're going to write. We talked about it the first day of class. I'm giving you a little bit of a setup here in week 3 or 4. It may tie to momentum. You might see a connection to one of the momentum themes. I'm picking this one on effort. This is stuff that you can use in that final paper. And I want to talk to you about it in light of the theme of my class. So here's where you fill in what it is about your class that makes your class unique and special in terms of your passion. And I want to talk to you about a person in the field of fill in your blank who was successful. And we're going to watch a little video about this person. Or I'm going to have you read an excerpt on this person's life. And then at your tables, I'd like you to talk about what marks of success you see in that person. Okay? So they're connecting this idea that will help them in that paper and in life to something in your particular field. You could do that with perspective taking up here. You could put spiritual formation up here. Let's talk about somebody in this area of study we're looking at these 15 weeks who was committed to spiritual practices and try to pick out from them what they did to make them that kind of person. Okay? So there's a bit of integration to the theme just with your course theme. But you might also do that related to faith, because in Christian faith, I might tell them, we don't define success like everybody else does. What it means for us to cross the finish line and say, and get the words well done, comes with different kinds of criteria and expectations than everybody else. So I'm going to ask you to read an excerpt from Rebecca DeYoung's book, Glittering Vices. Some of you are familiar with her. She spoke at the class opening day 4, 5, 6 years ago. Excellent book. It is an excellent book. She's very thoughtful in this. And I'm going to ask you to read an excerpt from her chapter on sloth. Because that will say something to you about how not to be successful. About what happens when you don't put forth the right kinds of effort. Okay? And so they go off and have that conversation around this big idea that's going to help move them forward in this paper. And you could leave it at that, or you could then try to do some faith integration on this, where you say, when we look at what Rebecca DeYoung says, and we look at this exemplar from the field that we're studying together, where do we see these things offering each other some exchange? In what way did that person we talk about embody some of the practices that emerge from a Christian understanding of sloth and the virtues that respond to that? And how, if this person had known these things, how might they be even more successful? Or is there any ways that they were successful that when we look back at Christian faith, we might say are not successful? So then off the students go to whatever's next for you, but now they've got something to work with, and you put some material in front of them that they could utilize in that final paper. So that's one way to go about it. Another way to go about it is to say, I'm not going to tie it to the theme of my class. I'm just going to take that theme of success and we're going to work with it. And one of the things that makes for successful people who give effort is resilience. So I'm going to put an article in front of them or an excerpt from an article. I'm going to ask them to read it, maybe do a short reflection on it or to talk to each other about it. And it's an article about resilience. But then you might decide that you're going to ask them to read Rebecca DeYoung's thing on sloth and to try to detect what does it mean to be resilient as a person of faith and to bring those things into conversation. So now in this example, your topic has not been front and center. What's been front and center is this idea that comes out of the stuff that Eileen shared with us that's going to help them again to write that paper with some content and some meaningful connections. So that's another way you could do it. You could do it with just the topic here, the big idea of success or perspective taking, etc. Or you could do it, as I illustrated before, with your topic. What I would like to challenge you to do is to try to bring all of that together. And yeah, that requires some complexity, and I get that. And you may, if it feels like you're forcing it, then don't do it, right? The students pick up on things that feel like when they start doing like this with their head, then somehow we're not there yet in terms of piecing it together in a meaningful way. And I say don't force it because that's not good faith integration, right? It's not worth forcing it. Round peg, square hole is not what we're aiming for here. You might find that a theme or a practice or a principle or a person, right, in your area can come together with the literature on resilience and what Christian faith says about sloth or whatever it is. I mean, in all of these different areas, there's possibilities in transitions, in goal setting, in perspective taking. There are things that you might do in terms of, again, preparing them for that final paper and the value that's going to come out of that final paper. The momentum paper is asking the students to give some comment about their spiritual wellness, their physical wellness, their emotional wellness, their intellectual wellness. So you might, throughout the semester, as a part of your content, take one of those themes and do some kind of integrative work on that, again, preparing them for that final assignment. This is also where it's good for us to be aware of what's happening across campus and with our partners. So you might decide, I can't do much or any of that. I've got too much other things I want to do. Fine. But if they know that they can call upon what they learned in Spiritual Formation Week, what they learned in Strengths Week, that tie to these things, what they learned when they heard about the different wellness opportunities here, those are outside of what you do in class. Fine, right? It's fine. But those are things they're going to be asked, so you get to help them recognize there's content and experiences available to then feed back in to writing that paper. Okay? Am I missing anything in making those kinds of connections to that? Any questions or thoughts or additions to this? This is the fun of course design, right? It's tricky, it's challenging, and can be overwhelming at moments, but then, aha, right? It comes together, the mixologist, and the work pays off. So, okay, a couple more faith integration related things. You can see I was still trying to do this. Like all of this, and I'll say this again in critical thinking, that the modeling and the demonstration of this is the biggest deal, right? We do things in academic ways. We give assignments and we give readings and we ask them to talk about things with some informed understanding. But this is back to Paul. After he said, this is right after where he says, if there's anything good and worthy and noble and true, think on these things. So right after the think on these things is, and the things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. So I think back to wellness, right? And peace of mind and heart, peace with myself and peace with God. Part of how I think we as leaders provide peace to others is by demonstrating what that looks like. And if you can be a demonstration of the faith integration in the stories you tell and the way you talk about how you've worked through those challenges, I think that's going to be a big deal.
And I would just say a few people have asked, is it okay to use my own book or use my own work? And I would say as long as it connects to the theme, absolutely. And I guess as Paul was just talking, I was like, yeah, that whole qualitative research idea of researcher as instrument. I think this facilitator is instrument as much as possible. And I think, all of you have good boundaries in terms of, the class being about the students, not about you. But if you can really be that vehicle for learning and model that, and for me, with Christian higher ed, I was only at secular research ones before coming here. So that's going to inform how I approach that. A lot when I teach human sexuality, I work with HIV/AIDS for years, so that informs that. And I know, Brian's topic, Gary, just a lot of you have such rich work that you can bring into the class. So I would highly encourage that.
Yep.
Highly encourage
It's a big
that.
deal. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I gave you a list in the iPad of book recommendations. And to be clear again, they're not required. These were the kinds of things around our big themes that I thought might be worth you looking at. Okay, so I asked you to look at that. Let me say this, and then I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about this with me. How do you use books and articles and things related to integration? Because some people think that you need to have a faith-related book in the mix in order for faith integration to be acceptable. Not true, right? So you gave Louise got a good example here. Can I take your stack? Okay. So Louise has been diligently looking for a kind of book that would work for something that's very unique, right? Chemistry and global citizenship, right? What a challenge, right? And from a faith perspective, she's interested in thinking about that. So she's got things here she's checking out: green discipleship, theological ethics in the environment, God, creation, and climate change, the Bible and the environment towards a critical, ecological, biblical theology. What did you decide about these?
A 17, 18-year-old won't sit through it and enjoy it and learn.
Brilliant, right? That's the kind of discernment we're calling for. At the same time, I bet you that in her lectures and in her talk about this kind of thing, she'll find things in sources like this that she can put in front of them as a part of how they grapple with these ideas. And so she made a decision to pick a book, and this is a faith-based book, Christian faith and natural science, how they intersect, not just science, right? The student will respond to this. You're hoping, you're believing, right?
Yes.
But if she didn't use a faith-based book, that's fine from a faith integration perspective, as long as these kinds of things have some opportunity. So you might assign a book. You might excerpt from a book or an article so that they can talk to each other, or so they can respond in an essay. You might use these things in your lectures and in your PowerPoints and stuff. You might include academic resources and name these kinds of people so students know, again, they need to know that thoughtful Christian people are dealing with these themes in thoughtful ways. Give them names. Tell the stories of these people. How did John Polkinghorne, as a scientist, as a physicist, theologian, work that out? And what's his story? Werner Heisenberg, as a physicist who was a Christian and spoke to audiences about how his faith informed his science. Tell the students the story, even if you don't have them read his stuff, that they know there's such people out there and begin to plant these in their mind is a valuable thing. Okay, so I think we won't do this for time. I know I asked you to look and to read about how you made some decisions looking at those different materials, and I hope you might do that with each other. I'm sorry, I'm going to skip that for now because I want you to know about the resources available to learn more about how to do this. Okay. So next year, as the last few years, Michelle Smolmer and I from the libraries, from theological libraries, do a workshop on just this topic. How do we identify and use sources in meaningful ways? Let me give you this too. This is a gift. You're going to love this if you don't know about this already. A couple of things that I'm putting in your hands right now. So you know how to find the databases around your area of study and expertise because you work with them a lot. They're particular often to fields of study. But in faith integration, we want to challenge you to explore databases that will offer you theological, biblical kinds of input. Okay? So here's a step-by-step thing. It's going to be in the thing when we send it over to the iPad. You go to the library, you get this as usual. Click on all databases. And then go down and click on the one called ATLA Religion Database. Okay? Some of you have been in here, but I bet a lot of you haven't had a chance to be in this one. Click on that. You're going to get this come up, and I was thinking about Brian bringing his syllabus to us today. So I typed into the search engine immigration and Bible. Just those two words. You might, you use different words to find these. You know how this works, right? Now I'm excited. This is the hunt, right? This is the adventure. Am I going to get anything, right? So here's what comes up. Here's the very next screen. Welcoming the stranger toward a theology of immigration in Deuteronomy. Oh, that sounds fun, right? If I'm interested in that subject, I'm gonna take that on. And you welcomed me, a theological response of the militarization of U.S.-Mexico borders and the criminalization of undocumented immigrants. Maybe. I don't know. Haunting the streets of Cairo, visual habits of the biblical imagery in 19th century Holy Land photography. Well, that's not my class, right? Maybe the guy who does photography, right? That's his class, but I don't. And Christians at the border, immigration, the church, and the Bible. First page, I'm getting some things, if I'm looking through the lens of Brian Lampkin's class, that might be useful. And then again, the hunt continues to decide if they are, or if they're excerptable, or if these are things for that final paper you want to put in students' hands, not make them go find it, put it in their hands and say, I want you to respond to this as a part of your research paper, as an element of your research paper, okay? So do that with your area and hunt, and I hope you have fun with that. Here's the other thing I want you to know about. In your iPad is a document that Michelle prepared out of the library for us. It's an amazing gift that you should know about and get comfortable with. Faith Integration LibGuides. Okay, you know about LibGuides. You've perhaps used them in your area. She's got a site there that puts all of our disciplines, the major areas, and you click on that, and it is your starting point for things that you might want to find related to faith and your field of interest. And so who's had a chance to use the Faith Integration LibGuides? Okay. So, and did you find anything, Eric? Eric's got a narrow area, right?
Yes. It was helpful. It's helped me see different perspectives than I would otherwise have seen.
It's sort of, I hadn't thought of it that way, right? As a possibility, yeah. So it's a great gift, and I encourage you, as you think about materials to use, to check out these two different areas, okay? Let me show you a movie clip, and then we'll transition, do something fun together, and then talk about critical thinking. This is my favorite Faith Integration clip. And I've showed it in different settings, but you are the perfect group to show this to because she's a freshman, right? She's a first-year student, and think of her leaving mom and dad and coming into your classroom, right? You got enough light? Let me turn all the lights off. That'll be good. She could have gone to Cal State Northridge, or maybe tried to get into a UC in a faraway place, but she chose APU, right? And it looks a lot like those other places. She visited them, and they have, desks and offices and libraries. It's not unfamiliar to these other places. Mom, Dad, they're gone. I'm going. First day of class, right? And she comes to your first year seminar, and she's nervous and excited all at once. I mean, all the emotions are happening, and she's backing into it because she's new place. It feels familiar. It's kind of like high school. New things, big things, but then something different happens. She realizes this is not what I thought it was going to be. This is something more than UCLA. This is something bigger than Cal State. And she looks, and then you help her to explore, right? You help her to see this big world of learning and knowledge and ultimately wisdom that she's not going to get anywhere else because she's hanging out with you. Somebody reminded me recently that it's not just the freshman that experiences this, it's us. When we start exploring the new opportunities in our faith and in our discipline and how they come together and see the beauty and the wonder of it all. And if there's any doubt, as Christians, we want our students to understand that this class and this university and my life as I stand before you is built around a light that shows the way, that's a light unto my feet. It shows my path, where I need to go, and it helps me to get perspective. And then later she meets the witch.